Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Hi. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll just give a few minutes for others to join. Feel free to grab a water or some coffee, or if it's lunch where you are, bring your lunch.
I just want to say hi to Khushi.
I was just talking about my first trip to Canada. How are you doing?
Good. Lovely to see you. We still recognize each other. That's good.
We look the same, don't we? Sort of. The hair color sort of.
You for sure. You for sure. Yeah.
No, you too. I could recognize you even on the street if I saw you.
Thank you. Lovely to see you. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Sari. All right, welcome everyone. We'll get started in just a few moments. I think we've got everyone in. I'll continue to admit people as they join. We're really thrilled to have everyone here for what promises to be a super interesting conversation between David Brewer, my colleague, and Khushi Kabir of Nijera Kori. So thanks so much for taking time out of your day to join us. I'll start by noting that we do have simultaneous interpretation available for the conversation today. So if you'd prefer to listen in French, feel free to navigate to the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and select the French channel. Fanny is here giving interpretation to us today. So thanks so much, Fanny, for joining us. My name is Ashley Armstrong, and I'm a communications co-director with Inter-Paris, and I'm joining you today from the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. We pay respect to the Algonquin people, who are the original guardians of this land, and we acknowledge their longstanding relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. For those of you who know us, and for those of you who are new, Inter-Paris means among equals, and we are a feminist social justice organization that believes in solidarity as an approach to international cooperation. Our programs largely focus on 6 global issues: migration, economic justice, health, peace and democracy, gender justice, and food sovereignty. We work with long-term counterparts like Nijera Kori, who are local and national activist organizations in Africa, Latin America, Canada, and Asia. And if you're interested in learning more about our work, you can find us on our website at interparis.ca and on social media. So before we dive into the conversation, I have a couple of housekeeping items to note. If you need any tech support throughout the webinar today, please feel free to chat me directly in the chat box here or send me an email. Again, my name is Ashley Armstrong. And the chat will remain open for the duration of the webinar, and we invite you to use it. So please feel free to add your comments and questions there, and we'll come back to them after the presentations. In the meantime, we'd love to get a sense of who's in the virtual room with us today. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and share with us where you're joining from. Also, as you saw in the email, the webinar will be recorded, so we'll be sure to send that to you afterwards. So you've all joined us today to learn more about how youth are mobilizing against violence in Bangladesh. As I mentioned, I'm joined by my colleague, David Brewer, and Khushi Kabir of Nijera Kori. Thanks so much for joining us, David and Khushi, especially Khushi at such a late hour in Bangladesh. You might be the one that needs the coffee. So both David and I wouldn't sleep. So both David and Khushi will share more about this issue, and then we'll open up space for Q&A. On that note, I'll pass it over to David.
Great, thank you very much, Ashley. I'm coming to you from my basement bedroom, and I apologize, I can't mute myself, or you wouldn't hear me, but my partner is on the other side of the wall on her own call, so you may get some background noise. That's the reality of living and working at home these days. So thank you all for coming. I'm a program manager with Inter-Paris, and I've had the pleasure of being the main person in our organization with the chance to relate to the work of Nijera Kori in Bangladesh. So I think Ashley has shared the little survey, and we'll look at that in a second to see how familiar people, what is bringing you to this. I've been traveling to Bangladesh since 2008, but I just want to say our relationship with Nijera Kori goes back much, much farther than that. In fact, Khushi, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it goes back to really the formation of Nijera Kori in 1980, practically, and has continued without interruption ever since. And this is an example of how Enterprise approaches our relationships with counterparts. We look for groups that share our analysis that poverty and marginalization are the result of inequality and injustice within countries and among countries. And Nijera Kori has taken that approach from the very beginning. And I think it would be fair to say that they have probably influenced us as much as we may have influenced them. As a very strong feminist, it was Khushi who really questioned some of our structures in the early days of Inter Pares and helped us to become the feminist organization that we try to be today. And the flat structure of co-managers instead of a hierarchical organization. So I think we, as Inter Pares, our name means among equals, and that's how we try to think of the relationship that we have with the counterparts that we're able to support around the world. So, sorry that I thought Ashley had shared this survey. So can I ask you to do that now, Ashley? And we just want to find out sort of what is your connection to Bangladesh? Sort of how do you know about our work? What do you know? Do you have family and friends? Are you coming to us from Bangladesh? So I can see people voting very quickly here. And while you're doing that,
none of the above.
None of the above. Okay. What I see here so far is that some people's work centers around Bangladesh, but for an awful lot of you, it's brand new. It's all new for me. I see 75 people, 75% of the people who responded said that. So that's maybe a good point for me to jump in. I'm going to try and share my screen if I can manage that technical. Okay. And so I just want to share with you first, if you're coming brand new to the issue of Bangladesh, the map on the left, well, it's on my left anyway, should be where is just to help you locate Bangladesh, surrounded almost by India, bordering Burma, where we also have very, very big programs. And you see in the more detailed map, now Bangladesh is small by Canadian standards, so all of that would fit in between Windsor and Ottawa, no problem. And yet that's 160 million people. So to say it's crowded by Canadian standards is a bit of an understatement. It is one of the fastest growing economies in Asia, but it is one of the most unequal in terms of how the benefits of that growth are distributed. Corruption is a major problem and one that Nijera Kori and the landless groups work on holding local officials to account. It's a majority Muslim country with a growing religious fundamentalism that I'm sure Khushi will probably comment on, but it is by no means a country that is 100% Muslim. There are significant populations within that who are Hindu, who are Christian, who are Buddhist, who are atheist. Well, it's perhaps a dangerous thing to be at times in Bangladesh. So despite the economic growth and the large and very large garment industry that I think people in Canada are very aware of, the majority of people still depend on agriculture and land for their livelihood. But a great many people don't own land and are forced to sell their labor to survive. So I'll just quickly switch. If I can, oh, there we go. Nijera Kori has always taken a rights-based approach to all of their work. Landless groups, the people in the villages, you learn your rights, you demand your rights. You use that knowledge that to hold local authorities accountable. And the power comes from the numbers. And you get a sense of that. This photo is of one assembly of Nijera Kori landless group members, but it's a tiny fraction. Now, I'll put up the next slide just to say, when I speak of landless groups, Nijera Kori helps people in villages, the most marginalized people within the villages, to form groups, 20, 25 people, men or women. It's normal to form women's groups and men's groups as recognition that in mixed groups, it would be common for men to dominate discussions and dominate procedures in the groups. There are groups, however, that have sort of surpassed that and have become mixed groups that are some of the older groups within Nijera Kori. And to give you an idea of the scale, we're talking about, and Khushi can correct the numbers if she likes, but it's something like 10,800, I think Khushi this morning said it was over 11,000 groups, 1,100, close to 1,200 villages in Bangladesh. And we're looking at over 200,000 men and women who are part of these landless groups. So this is a very large scale organization. I'm going to stop sharing and come back here. But just to be clear that Nijera Kori don't tell the landless groups what to do. They accompany the landless groups. It is the landless groups who are the owners of this process. So I just want to say, just to wrap up before turning it over to Khushi, in 2020, Enterprise obtained funding from the Partnership Branch of Global Affairs Canada for a project called Strategic Interventions to Build Momentum on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. Now, it's a really long name. We call it BILMO for short. It has 4 local partners: Likaan in the Philippines, SWORD in Sudan, Colectiva Feminista in El Salvador, and Nijera Kori in Bangladesh. So there are 4 countries, and they all share very high levels of religious fundamentalism, high levels of sexual and gender-based violence, and low levels of access to sexual and reproductive health care. It's a 4-year project, and it's allowed us to scale up our support to Nijera Kori and focus that support on issues related to sexual and gender-based violence. One part of that work is activities aimed at youth, and that is what we've invited Khushi to talk about today. So I've known Khushi since before I even made my first trip to Bangladesh in 2008. She came to Canada for a learning circle. Khushi is a very well-known voice in Bangladesh on issues of women's rights and many other issues. Earlier this morning, which was her evening, she was in another webinar reflecting on the 50th anniversary of Bangladesh's formation as a country in 1971. So we're very fortunate that Khushi is a bit of a night owl and able to stay up to be with us now to make it more convenient for us to listen. And with that, I would like to turn over the microphone to Khushi to speak about this really exciting work with youth. So I will end my intervention there, and Khushi, you.
Thank you, David. So yeah, I've had a very long and I consider a very pleasant, a very smooth, and I have always used our relationship with Interparis as what ideally partnership is about. Everyone now uses the word partnership, but they behave like if they're giving you the funds for a project or for a program, they hold the reins and they'll tell you what to do. And Interparis is totally an example of what the organization should be. We are lucky that the funding that we get from our organizations, they all believe in us and trust us. But many times it's not the institution or organization itself as the people who run the Asia desk or the South Asia desk or whatever. But I think what Interparis stands out, and that's why I want to thank Interparis, and I always say yes to Interparis, is because of all the things that David said at the beginning about how it's a flat organization, it's a feminist organization. It really has no hierarchy. I'd like to say a bit about the work we are doing, and in order to place it in the context of Bangladesh, though David did an excellent job, I'll just put it in the socio-political context, which is now the situation. 21 days from today is going to be the day when Bangladesh formally declared independence, and we began a war of liberation war, we call it, where it was not armed forces fighting, it was the people of the country. There were peasants, there were workers, there were students, there were people from all walks of life, people who were 14, 15-year-olds, everybody who felt they needed to really create this country. And I won't go into details now, but this is the 50th year because this happened in 71. And I was a very young adult, just became, in those days, 21 was being an adult. So I had just turned 21. And so this was exciting times, worrying times. There was a genocide on the 25th of March. And that genocide led to the Declaration of Independence, because by then it was clear that we were part of Pakistan then, that Pakistan would never accept us as equals, even though we were the majority. So this year, which marks the 50th anniversary of us being, wanting to create our own nation, a state, had 4 principles, which is also in the preamble to the Constitution. And the 4 principles were nationalism, socialism, democracy, and secularism, because Pakistan was an Islamic state and we just broke away from Pakistan. Unfortunately, the situation with all these four principles that we fought for, and everyone fought for, in whatever way they could, are no longer practiced in the way it was intended to be practiced. So, this is how I just want to say that 50 years later, we have made progress in terms of Bangladesh has made progress, because when it was first, Bangladesh was first made independent, Henry Kissinger made this famous comment saying that there's no point in helping Bangladesh, it's a basket case and it'll never, 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 ever be able to stand on its own. But we've made progress in many areas. One is life expectancy. I just got some figures. I'll just very quickly just say that the life expectancy in at birth for females in 70, just immediately after 71 was 45.8 years, 46 years. And now it's 75 years in 2020. And male life expectancy at birth, this is all from the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, in 71 was 47 years, and it's now 71.13 years, 71 years. So we can see that unlike the rest of the world, in 71, women's life expectancy was less than the men. And now it is like in the rest of the world, more than the men. So it was 3 years less than the men before, now it's 3 years more than the men. So this shows an idea of how we have progressed in certain spheres. For women, the workforce rate was only 12.1 in 75, and it rose to 36.42, but 42, so about 36.5. But they don't take into account the casual labor or the informal sector. So if that is counted, then it would get much higher. Infant mortality for the under 5 was very high before. It was 222 per 1,000 live births. It's now decreased to 30. So you can see that we've done a lot, especially even in the education and female education. It's increased quite a lot. And in the gender disparity, we have lessened the gender disparity so much that we're now probably number 50 in the world in terms of gender disparity. And very proudly, many of us say that we're even higher than the United States of America. Not that that's something to feel very proud about. But so, yes, so we've made progress. A country that is, as David said, is majority Muslim. It's now almost 90% that is Muslim, maybe a little more, but as per the last census, 90%. But at the time when we, in 71, it was 23% non-Muslims and 87%, 77% Muslims. So you can see that how the ratio has gone down. The number of non-Muslims have decreased radically. And for people like us when we say that one of the principles was secularism, and the way we define secularism was being open to everyone having the right to their own belief and thought in whichever way they wish to practice or not practice. So secularism meant being open to every religion. The founding father of the country was a very devout Muslim, but he was also very open to all religions and people who didn't have a religion either, or atheists. So It's just that his personal thing was there, but he didn't impose it on others. So when it gets down to 10%, that worries us a lot. Also, what worries us is there is no acceptance of the fact that we have indigenous communities. Indigenous peoples are called small ethnic minorities, which I think is we've stated it publicly many times over, that it's not a very, it's not a very nice way, it's not a very honorific way to define somebody as a small ethnic minority group. So we, unfortunately, this government, when it came to power in 2009 elections, in its election manifesto, talked about giving rights to indigenous communities using the word indigenous. And yet, after it came, it didn't. So there are minorities, and I hate the word minorities because everybody as a citizen is, as per constitution, gets equal rights, but they're treated as minorities. There are, the violence against women is very high. That's one of the highest. I mean, though a lot of maybe the gap, the gender gap has closed a lot, but the violence remains and the insecurity of women remains. And one of the areas where we've really gone below the mark and it's very high, we're probably the 4th highest in the world, is child marriage. And that child marriage stems from insecurities too. And that gives you an idea of what we are talking about when we are talking about mobilizing youth against violence in Bangladesh as part of this, what we call the BILMO project, the sexual and gender-based violence project. So I just gave you an idea. Politically, we are officially a democratic country. We're also officially secular. Secularism is in our constitution, but we have a state religion, even if we are a secular nation. So the state religion being Islam. And we are a democracy, but we have a very weak opposition, and the kind of the farce that takes place during elections, whether because the opposition is weak or because the party in power is strong and has been able to control anybody who's, really controlling the booths, etc., and all that to vote. We just have this same party coming 3 times over now. And, it's all right. They could come 3 times over through a popular vote, and they may have come if there was popular vote properly done. But there's any hint of criticisms is not looked at as being very welcome. Yet when this party came into power once before in 96, this is the party that was in the lead in our liberation war. Then in 75, August 15th, the person who was the leader of the nation, because of whose 100th, whose centenary was just last year, but because of the COVID, they couldn't celebrate it. They were planning to do it this year, along with the Golden Jubilee. So he was assassinated brutally along with his whole family by a group of army officers or ex-army officers. And after that, democracy fled. And successive governments that came were first military governments who then formed their own party. And in 1990, there was an uprising and we had democracy back again. Then in 96, the present party came back into power after being ousted in 75. In 96, they were much more open to criticisms, to listening to voices, wanting to hear. Then next 2001, they were ousted again. And when they came back in 2009, they decided they couldn't afford not to be in power. And so they have no interest in wanting to listen at all to any criticism. And we have something called the Digital Security Act. If you post, repost, like, or anything which somebody thinks is against the prime minister or member of the parliament or anything, just even reposting something that's come out in the newspapers about corruption, you may be taken under the Digital Security Act. And recently we had a writer, a poet who died while in custody, after which there's been a big furrow. So I'm just trying to say that democratic space is shrinking a lot in Bangladesh. The reign of thugs taking over and the reins of everything has become quite prevalent. And along with this, we see that the government is turning a blind eye to the kind of wrongdoings that is happening in the ground, in the villages, in the towns, anywhere. They are pandering to the military forces who are taking away indigenous lands to build resort, like the Marriott chain hotel are going to have a big chain. Of course, they've been criticized, and the Marriott quickly backtracked and said, we didn't sign anything. So how come the huge billboards used to be there with their name and their logo, etc. over there? So a very small indigenous community, small in the sense of being small in numbers, who are really on the verge of being kicked out and us losing them totally, is happening. And this happens in the hill tracts and with other indigenous communities, even in the plain lands. So I'm bringing these in just to say that the other group that the government is also seems to, the government, I will say it's not the government so much as the government party in power, is pandering to is the Islamist forces, Islamic forces, religious forces. And that, again, is pushing us back a lot. We've had a woman as the head of the government since 1991. And that's, it's visually, and also for, a young kid in the village, she can dream that, it's possible for her as a woman to be a prime minister. A woman can be a prime minister. Yet, none of the prime ministers we've had have really, though we've done a lot in terms of the gender gap, has really looked at the issue and the question of women's and children's security. Young boys who go to the religious madrasa education are brutalized, they're raped, young girls are raped, and all these different kinds of violence takes place. And I've been working in the villages since the 70s. And so that is something that I've seen, that the kind of brutality has increased so much. Now, in this context, what are we trying to do? First we started working with the women and men, as David first said, separately because women need a space where they can open up, talk, and they really need a space to talk. I still need a space to talk. And then collectively together, when they formed enough groups in that village, so they form a committee, they came up and said, our children are being indoctrinated a totally different way, and you need to start working with our kids too, because their peers and people around them are giving them the wrong ideology and the wrong kind of information, and they are trying to push and impose what they think is right upon us, their parents. That's when we started working with the youth. And when this program came up, it fitted in so well with what we're doing. So I'll just give you a small example of what a young girl in Bangladesh is like, especially if she's from the village or she's from a lower income, lower middle class, lower income group in the cities. Her mother may be a garment worker or whatever, or working in people's homes as domestic help, or she may be in the village, growing up in the village. First, at the moment she's born, her home is not her home. She is going to be married off. So they teach her, try to be docile, because if you show that you have a spirit, in your in-laws' house, it will not be accepted. So curb her and cut her down immediately. Our culture teaches both boys and girls never to question. You don't question your books, textbooks, even if they're all wrong, and they're often totally wrong and racist and sexist, definitely sexist, and very against tolerant, very intolerant. So these kids are taught not to question whoever they think they have latched onto as the person who will be giving them the light, the guiding light. And this is a very dangerous situation for allowing intolerance to grow, definitely, but it may also lead to the kind of violent extremism which led to, in 2015, the killing of a lot of bloggers, atheists, freethinkers, or publishers or writers. So I think I just wanted to give you this background that what we think is very important is for the children to start learning to be creative, to start learning to have fun, especially the girls, to learn about their own sexuality and their bodies and what makes, there's no, the kind of the social construct of gender, and that they may be in between. There's so many, this gender fluidity. So all these things we need to talk about, and we weren't sure that the villages, the kids would be ready for it. But thanks to Bilma, when we started this program, we found that it was very ready. So I'd like to show you a few pictures of the kind of programs that we've been taking and the kind of enthusiasm that is amongst the girls. So the first picture, if we go right to the first picture, this is just the first picture totally on top. This is just to show you what the South Asian village looks like. Here are kids. This was, the kids were all asked to draw themselves, how they saw themselves and how they would like to draw themselves. So you can see, different colors that they projected themselves in. There's a boy who's drawn himself as a woman too. Fine, whatever they wish to draw. So this is, actually the drawing and painting and coloring and making your own pictures is not something that's traditionally done. Here this is one of the most conservative regions in the country, where girls are never to be seen unless they're wearing the total hijab or burqa, where everything is covered, including their hands, gloves, face, nose, even socks, even in the middle of the summer and when it's really very hot. So here they decided to go on a cycle rally, girls and boys both. They stopped at the major schools or major marketplaces, and they spoke about against violence against women and talked about why they were doing this rally and why it was important. And this was the first time the girls they borrowed bicycles. They learned how to ride a bicycle in a couple of weeks. Some of them were still shaky, but this created a great impact, because here were all these kids, as you see, doing what you can see on the last picture on the right, that the other women, older women, all covered totally. That here are these young girls going off in the rickshaw, which they would not have been able to do before. The next slide, please. We decided again in one of the more just next to it, a very remote area, where people not only wore the burqa, but the women had to carry 2 umbrellas so that they could stand by the roadside with the 2 umbrellas, sit under the umbrellas, so people would know there was a body inside. So the young kids were playing football, and here they are running and playing football in the field, and enough people watching. There was no negative comment whatsoever. Next slide. So this really gives them a lot of freedom. Here is in another area that we are working in, totally different, where they decided that for the 1 Billion Rising program, that they would do a 1 kilometer long painting on the streets. We have a cultural thing called the Alpona, which is some people, the fundamentalists, Islamic fundamentalists would like to claim that it's Hindu. We claim it's our cultural Bengali. And here were the kids decided that they would like to do it and do this whole kilometer long painting on the streets. And again, just being able to be there on the streets, painting, doing this, it created an impact inside them too. They got much more positive and strong. Next picture. Here there were, there has been a lot of sexual violence, rape, gang rapes. And what is happening is more frightening is with the smartphone, pictures are taken and then there's photoshopped, and then the girls are being, they're coerced into having a relationship. Otherwise, this will go viral. And if they don't, they make it viral. And there have been suicides as a result of that. So here are all these young people who they have young boys also with them, protesting and saying that we are going to stop. What these kids have sometimes done is when they hear from someone that this group of boys have been harassing and teasing the girls, they just gone to as a group together and said, listen, you better stop. If I hear one more complaint about you, we are going to come and bash you up. And that really works sometimes because it's a huge group of them and they come with such strength and power within their voices. Next. These are just snapshots of what we are doing. Here again, football. Football is so popular with the girls. I think the fact that they can run across the ground as much as they wish to, play, throw the ball up, run around. I think we find that it is one of the most popular sports. When we hear about other things, the girls all want, the boys want to do cricket, but the girls all want to play football. Next. Here again, this is one of these more conservative places where the head covering is part of the uniform of the school, pushed upon them. One or two girls, as you see, have put the head coverings down, but that has been, that was considered part of the school uniform when I asked that they did that. But they're protesting still. Next one. We decided to do graffiti through stencils and spray paint. So in the 16 days of activism for last year, 2020, there was all over the country, we sent them this stencil and this graffiti was painted. I will show you a few more pictures. Here's this girl. They loved it, spraying the cans and playing around with the stencils. But you can see a lot of people are very enthusiastically watching. Here are kids watching and talking about it. Here are men watching and talking about it. And what it says is, we will not tolerate violence on women's bodies anymore. And the fist. And they didn't know what the women's symbol was, and that was then a thing for discussion. But the slogan everyone could read, and there was a lot of discussions because in every wall they could find, they started putting this graffiti all over. Next. The next slide, yeah. We had in one area artist group that are very well known who decided to get the kids to paint on saris. So we had this sari exhibition, 3 saris painted, and they painted whatever they wished to. The fact of them painting on a sari, and this was taken from one market town to a village to another market village. It went around 10 or so villages, and there was a huge crowd of people who watched it. And so it made a great impact. We plan to do 9 more this year. After March, we'll start again. Next. Here they are doing a little theater of their own, singing, dancing, and a play, drama performance. Next. We've started the training on sexual and gender-based violence and with the kids, and really the kind of openness they started calling, there's a hierarchy within our culture where the elders are called, older sister or aunt or something. But they started calling all my colleagues and everybody as friend. So they would say, Bondhu. So Bondhu so-and-so, Bondhu so-and-so. So even Rose was made to dance. I don't think he's put the picture of him where they all surrounded him and made him dance with them. So here they're taking part. It's a participatory process where they talk about themselves, their bodies, and reproductive rights and sexual rights, and what violence is, and what is good touch, what is bad touch, the usual. But more than that, we frame it within the political context of understanding what rights are. So it's a rights-based approach. Next. Here they've, part of the training was to go into smaller groups and then write down what they wish. So here's, each one reading others' group points. Next. We now have started to try and create their own space for our adolescent girls. So where they not only do gardening, but they can sing, they can dance, they can paint, they can do what they wish to do. That space is theirs, and of which a bit of it will be also gardening. So here they are, all kids working together and trying to grow, because during the COVID situation, when you couldn't buy vegetables, the market wasn't rising, the markets weren't sitting anywhere, people started then growing everything on their own in the villages too. So that's when the kids also began, and we thought it's excellent, because teaching them that it's very right and correct. Otherwise, there's a distancing between what the parents are doing as agricultural labor or farmers, and them going to school and thinking that their dreams are to be lawyers and doctors. So we think it's important that this is done, and that's what they're doing. So we just wanted to share with you some of the activities. The main reason being that we want them to think as much as they can, to think more creatively, think more freely, really think and question and say no. I'll just tell you a little story of something that happened, which I heard just yesterday. A young girl who is just in grade 10 now, she was raped by a teacher of a religious school. She goes to a regular school. And then her father and everybody felt that her honor, the woman's body bears the honor of not her only, but the family and the village and everything. And the only way to protect the honor is to get her married off to the rapist. And if you've been reading papers, you'll see in India is some Supreme Court, the justice also, the Chief Justice felt that the rapist should be married off to this person raped. I mean, I just don't understand the sick mentality, but that's it. Her father forced and took her to get married to the rapist, this madrasa teacher. She refused, she ran away, she rang up the police, the 999, and she was strong enough to say no. She's not one of our group members, but then our group members heard about it and came and gave her the support and got us involved. So I just wanted to say that more and more girls are now being much more aware of themselves, much more aware of their rights, much more aware that they do not have to accept what is given as norms as being something that they have to agree upon. I'll stop here. I've taken a lot of time. Sorry.
No, thank you very much, Khushi. That was really, really interesting. And I know we've got already some questions. And so I think we've got about 10 or 15 minutes left. So I want to move right into that. The first one I see up here is asking about the relationship that Nijera Kori and the landless groups have with local authorities, and are you getting support from those authorities, or vice versa?
You see, because we work with local communities, and I'll just say that, David, when you were saying that we accompany the landless groups, I remember somebody who came and did a study on Nijera Kori said the difference between Nijera Kori and other NGOs was Nijera Kori works with the local people, not for the local people. So we don't work for others, but we work with them. So we have a very strong bonding and relationship with a huge group of people. And because we have that great strength, of numbers and people who are aware and who can demand and know what the rights are, know what the constitutional rights are, know what the laws are, they can challenge the government bureaucrats. And when there is an organization like Nijera Kori, and we've been in existence now for 40 years, and I mean, I don't want to brag, but because I've been in this thing since after the liberation from 72, so my name and face is also pretty well known. So they know Nijera Kori also has me. They have the group members and they have our staff who are very active. So the local government authorities realize that when we take up an issue or the landage group takes up an issue and we are with them, they do take us seriously. Like in this case of this girl, the moment we heard about it, like this happened on the 17th of February, we heard about it just 3 days ago, 2 or 3 days ago. And the moment we went there, my colleagues went there, immediately the police and the doctors and everybody were very supportive and saying, we're so glad you've come, please bring others also. We want that this justice gets done and there's no compromise, because they're very afraid that the father will force her. The girl did the case herself. Her father didn't want to. That will force her to compromise.
I know that as part of the Bilmo project, the plan was to set up committees in villages sort of linked to schools for the prevention of sexual harassment and child marriage. I'm just wondering if, particularly in the COVID context, I know that schools are a lot of them are still closed. How's that part of the program going? What are you able to do?
Well, yeah, we had, before the COVID really hit, there's a court order which has now become a rule that every school has to have a committee for people to be able to complaints committee for sexual harassment. Mm-hmm. Now, since the schools are closed, this committee is of not really functioning that much. But the harassment continues because in the villages, people are not really maintaining social distancing so much. There's not so much COVID cases in the villages for whatever reason that's known. So but the police and all were told to maintain, total lockdown. So at that time, there was a lot of gang rapes. People would be dragged out of the houses, women would be raped in their houses, children were raped. So that's when these committees that we formed spoke up, went to the police station. The committees forced the older people to get active. So yes, the Bilmo project, we think, is something that's given us the strength that we work with this younger generation, and we find that they're much more open, because when we're doing these workshops, we do it with the kids, but then we do it later on with the adults. And we find the kids are much more open, much more receptive than the adults. It takes us a little longer to work with the adults to start getting them to accept this. But the kids just catch on immediately and start working.
I
think that's the only way we can combat, I don't like the word combat, but confront religious fundamentalisms and violence against women and child marriage and all this, because many places they've stopped child marriage, The message has gone to these committees, these kids committees, and they've just gone and taken action.
Khushi, I know that I've also heard that you, as part of the response to COVID, put in place a hotline, or a lot of hotlines, I suppose. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, when we were totally under lockdown, even in the villages, right at the beginning, so how would we keep contact and how would we know what is happening? So we had some of our group leaders, like in each of our centers, we have quite a number of centers, about almost 30 centers, where our staff live. And so we'd have 1 or 2 numbers in the centers and 3 or 4 numbers with the group leaders. So people could ring up and tell what's happening. So whether it's sexual assault or harassment, whether it's violence, whether it's corruption, whether it's someone, any kind of irregularities. There was a phone in, and we have a system, and we gave them all these a very swift way of giving us information every week, every day, in fact, but every week it's put together, and we collect it together to get a total picture of what is happening. And so we got a full picture of what's happening across in all the areas we're working in, and really build up support systems for that. Mm-hmm. So those hotlines were very, very effective at that time. Now it's being used less because the whole social situation has been that you don't need that kind of isolation anymore. No one practices it anymore. So the use is less now. So we're going to think about what the next step would be.
I'm seeing a question in the chat that it's more about the political system in Bangladesh, and saying, would you regard the party in power, the Alarmingly, as being essentially an oligarchy within Bangladesh? So I don't know if you want to weigh in on that one.
Well, I think not just in Bangladesh. If you look at our neighbors, and if you look beyond the oceans into other places too, we see how governments are sometimes run when you choose the wrong party and the wrong people in power. Luckily, your neighbor managed, despite all the drama of allowing narrowly to... The fact that clown got as many votes as he did and that his party still supports him leaves a lot to be desired. So yes, in our country too, to try and stay in power, people will do whatever they can, and that's no different with the party that we have in power too. And the next party that will come into power will do exactly the same. We are not even fooling ourselves in thinking that the next party would be better.
No, I think we don't know what's going to bring us here in Canada in terms of elections. There is a question as well about, I guess, a lot of the young women in one of the public marches were wearing red, and it's wondering if that has any special significance or...
Oh, because red is, red is a color of revolution. Red is a color of change. Red is a vibrant color. Red is the color I'm wearing. Red is the color for our liberation war. We use the color red. So they wore red. Red is the color of protest. So I think...
Okay. Great.
Red's a color that people think is strong, vibrant, and giving a very positive picture.
Okay, and I think that from your description, from the photos, that is certainly the image that I'm left with of the youth involved with the Nijera Kori and the landless groups is vibrancy and energy and enthusiasm. It's exciting to see that presented and hear a little bit about the work of Nijera Kori. And again, I emphasize Nijera Kori and the landless groups, the wonderful people in all of these 11,000 groups across Bangladesh. I see we are basically out.
I'll just say one thing, that when you see this vibrant, all these young kids and these girls being so vibrant, unfortunately, this is not true of the whole of Bangladesh. There are some. So in the area, what it is true is that if they're given that opportunity, they'll all be like this. But that opportunity doesn't exist.
Okay.
So that's why it makes it different. Yeah.
I'm going to sneak in one last question because on my clock, it's only 12:59, so we have a minute. Do you have activities with the Indigenous youth that you were talking about?
Yes, we do. We do with Indigenous youth and with Indigenous adults too. We are not working in the Chittagong. Bangladesh has the southeast corner are the hills, and that's the Chittagong Hill Tracts, which was 98% indigenous people. That were actually all indigenous people. Then slowly a few Bengalis came in for trade, commerce, etc. But because there was an there was they were denied a lot of rights. So there was a movement, and it was an armed movement. There was a conflict, and the way, like in most non-democratic places, and especially this was under army, quasi-army rule, Bengali settlers were brought in from the other parts of the country, and there were a lot of indigenous people, villages were burnt and people killed by the army and the others. And now every day, I think it's one or two. It's no longer like this huge village being burnt and cleared, but it's one, two, slowly ensuring that the indigenous communities become a minority. So we don't work there because I think over there is enough organization, because they were in armed conflict, they're very organized. But in the plain lands, there are a lot of indigenous communities who are also considered untouchable, and Dalits. And we work a lot with them. And they decided not to be part of the mainstream Bengali group, but they wanted to be the indigenous group with Nijera Kori. But together they do work on land rights and ensuring that the indigenous communities are not thrown off their land, that the indigenous women get the same. They work very hard, but they would get less wages. So movements to ensure equal wages. Sometimes the government has a policy of building cluster villages around a pond. So to ensure that those villages remain indigenous only, not that it is not mixed, because the indigenous wanted their own village themselves. So yes, we work with them, and very much so, but also is both ways, they feel they can trust us, and the mainstream Bengali landless groups learn how to accept and learn new cultures, and to learn about, how it's to be multicultural is, it's, you want, you don't want a monolithic ideology and everything, so it's, yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm glad we could squeeze that last question in. We are out of time. I'd like to thank everybody who attended. Thank you to Fanny for the interpretation. Thank you to Global Affairs Canada for the funding for the Bilmo project, and for, I think that I saw Fanny before, from Global Affairs in the list of the participants here. It's been really interesting. I think there's so much more to share. It's always too short in these kinds of webinars. And I thank you, Khushi, for making the time. I know it's been a very long day for you, and it's the middle of the night, so we really do need to let you go and get some rest. But thank you so much for sharing in this webinar.
Thank you.
Really,
I would never say no to Inter Pares. And a couple of people who've been, when they were introducing our people I've met when I first came here, was it 81 or 82? And it's lovely to again to reconnect, and thank you for Inter Pares for being what you all still are, and that we are using the Bilmo project to do something that we think is very meaningful, and something that I think would last, because that is where the main thing is. If the younger generation are totally not brought into the picture right now, later it'll be too late. So so yes, it was a thing, because 8th of March is coming. Everybody's having programs now for the 8th of March. So I started from this morning today. Then our 50th anniversary of the Bangladesh's independence. So all that together means that this month is a busy month for us.
It's a busy month indeed. So, thank you again.
Thank you.
We'll I guess end this. Can I end this, Ashley, or should we? I don't want to hit leave. Thank you, everybody. Okay.
Thank you. We can all three say thank you together.
Okay,
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
One, two,
Thank you.
three. Thank you.
Okay. Bye,
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 everybody.
everybody.
Bye-bye.